Good evening, welcome to the program. Well, it has been one of the most hotly contested policy areas for years, how to deal with asylum seeker boat arrivals. Before the last election, Labor embraced the policy of offshore processing. Now Bill Shorten wants to go another big step further and embrace the government's policy of turning back asylum seeker boats. It looks like he will get his way at the ALP conference, which kicks off in Melbourne tomorrow morning, but not without a fight. The left of the Labor Party met today, their caucus, on this conference eve, and there is a significant level of resistance. I'm told some frontbenchers may even defy the leader at the conference. However, it is expected he will have the numbers to prevail. Joining us tonight to look at this and some other big issues at the Labor Party conference, and what's also been a big week on the policy front on the government side as well, with the conversation now beginning on whether the GST needs to change. The COAG talks wrapping up just today, where this has been a big topic of conversation. Paul Fletcher is the Parliamentary Secretary for Communications. Kate Carnell, the Chief Executive of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry and a former Liberal Chief Minister of the ACT. Peter Beattie, former Labor Premier of Queensland, and Senator Lisa Singh, Shadow Parliamentary Secretary for the Environment, Climate Change and Water. Thank you all for joining us. Good to see you tonight. Now, let's start on turning back the boats. Lisa Singh, you are of the left of the Labor Party. As I say, the left caucused on this today. What is your view on whether Labor should embrace this policy?
Well, I don't think Labor should embrace this policy. I think that it is a cruel and inhumane policy. I think it is something that the coalition government have done in a very secret way. It is not something which spells of Labor values, of compassion, of fairness. And I also think it potentially breaches international law. So while it might be the coalition's policy, I don't think it should be Labor's policy. I do think that a broader, holistic policy when it comes to refugees and asylum seekers is needed, and I think that the revised chapter in Labor's platform, which will be debated tomorrow, has most of that in there. But over and above that, a regional settlement arrangement is what is really needed to deal with issues of boats and people smugglers and the like. Labor
has long argued that this is inhumane, that this is damaging our relations with Indonesia, putting lives at risk as well. Do you still believe all of that?
Yes, I mean, I think that very much. We don't want to see people getting on boats. Nobody, I think, on any side of politics would want to see that. Any compassionate government doesn't want to see people drowning at sea. Well, but at the same time, a compassionate government shouldn't want to be turning back boats either.
If you still think this is inhumane, damaging to our relations, as well as illegal potentially, as you've indicated as well, at the end of this party conference, what happens? Is there any way you would support this?
Well, let's have that debate. I mean, party conference gets underway tomorrow. I know that there will be a robust debate. There are some varying views on this within the Labor Party, and that's the way the Labor Party conducts itself. It has its internal debates. We have the vote, and we come out with our policy position.
These are not minor objections you're raising here. These go to, the humanity of the party. It goes to whether Australia is following the law. Surely there's no way, even putting your party allegiance in that mix as well, you can support something like this.
Well, I've made it very clear that I do not support this policy position. I mean, I think that, there has been a lot of eyes on Australia over the recent years especially. There has been a lot of demonising about asylum seekers from this coalition government. I mean, does Labor really want to follow lock, step and barrel behind a cruel government that demonises asylum seekers, or does it want to stand for human betterment? I think that's what we really do need to stand for.
Anthony Albanese, another prominent member of the left, and of course the leadership rival to Bill Shorten after the last election, he's been quoted as saying, expressing quite real concerns about the way that yesterday was conducted in terms of the announcement on asylum seekers. He says, I think that it is absolutely critical that we always remember our need for compassion and to not appeal to the darker side. Do you have concerns about the way Bill Shorten has dealt with this issue and the way it was announced yesterday without consultation across the party?
Well, I did think that it would be a debate we would have at conference. I didn't expect it to start coming out before conference, I have to say. So I was surprised yesterday to learn of that. Look, I know there is so much good in our chapter, because I've worked with Richard Marles and other Labor members on a working group to help revise that chapter.
Well, you knew his
there was no
position, though. You knew
turnbacks
where
in
he was
that. There was
going,
no turnbacks in that chapter.
You've seen Richard Marles' previous comments.
Absolutely, and I knew at some point, I thought at conference, we would have this debate, not beforehand.
So has Bill Shorten snubbed the caucus and indeed the party membership? Well,
I guess I'd agree with Anthony Albanese's assessment. I'm a bit perplexed as to why this has come out earlier than at conference. As you say, we all knew it was going to be a debate we would have. I just don't see the point of having raised it ahead of conference. We've had some really good policy announcements in the last couple of days to do with renewable energy, for example. It would have been good to hear more about that in the airwaves than this.
Well, why is it okay to announce that before the conference and not this one?
Well, that is a good point. That is a very positive policy that the party supports. This is not. Okay. This is a divisive policy point.
Peter Beattie, we discussed on PM Agenda this afternoon. You think this is the right call for Bill Shorten and for Labor. Remind us why, and this criticism about the timing, announcing it ahead of the conference.
Let me say, look, I respect Lisa's position on this, and there are a lot of people, genuine people in the left, who see themselves as the conscience of the party, and thank heavens that they are. But I frankly think Bill's right. The reality is that the turn-back policy has worked. And one of the things that I find distressing is people drowning when, frankly, we need to do whatever we possibly can to avoid it. So why do I support Bill? I don't want to see any more people drown. That's the first thing. Second thing is I do think we need to increase the refugee intake, and that's part of the strategy that comes forward. Lisa quite correctly talked about the Labor Party being a compassionate party, and we are, and we should reflect that in the policy of bringing more refugees in an orderly way. But the bottom line with all this is I also think it's important that Bill spelled out his position. Now, he either spelled it out before the conference or he spelled it out at the conference, but it would have been dishonest in my view not to let everybody know his view. He's done that before the conference. Certainly the debate will take place. Of course, it's always going to be difficult to roll a leader. And it wouldn't make any difference whether he announced it before or at the conference. But he should be clear about his position. Let the delegates then decide it. But frankly, as much as I hate to say this, the current policy's worked, and it's about saving lives, and I think that's an important priority for me, for someone who's actually compassionate as well.
Do you agree, Senator, that it's worked?
Look, there are a number of arrangements that have been put in place, which actually started under Labor, that has meant the boats have stopped coming. And one of those, of course, was offshore processing on Manus Island.
It's very hard to pick apart
exactly,
what's worked and what hasn't,
exactly,
but
yeah.
As a suite of policies, it's worked.
Look, I think what we really need, and I support a lot of what Peter says, other than the turnbacks, is a regional resettlement framework, which came out of the Bali process.
We've heard that for years.
Well, no, it hasn't. It hasn't been implemented.
Labor couldn't deliver on it.
The Liberal Party stopped.
Look, Labor is
from
hopelessly split on this. You are hopelessly split
on
this issue.
We were very supportive of regional resettlement.
The Leader of the Opposition announced a policy yesterday. We've just heard Lisa say she opposes it, and many other members of the left oppose it. It's a policy that's worked. It's a compassionate policy. Let's not forget, 1,100 people died. 50,000 people came by boat, 800 boats, 1,100 people died. We came to power with a policy that said, turn back boats, we're safe to do so. We were told couldn't be done. Bill Shorten has consistently been saying up until last week, doesn't work.
Do you give him credit then now for embracing, or at least trying to push the party towards something that clearly has a lot of internal division, is not easy politically for him to do? Do you give him any credit for taking this on?
What I say is, for the last 2 years, he's been saying this doesn't work. He's had this road to Damascus conversion. The question for the Australian people is,
he's finally when it comes
time to vote at the next election, if it's important to you that our borders are protected and that people aren't dying on boats at sea, who can you trust to deliver on the policy? Can you trust the coalition which developed the policy and implemented it?
Isn't this what frustrates people about politics, right?
Yes,
exactly right.
He did really well in changing his mind and coming out and saying it.
It's a huge backflip. It's all on the record, all the things that he said. But when he finally embraces it, you've got to give him some
Can you
credit.
deliver? Can you trust him to deliver on it? Kevin Rudd stood up before the last election and said this reckless spending has to stop, and spend. He also said turnbacks, didn't do it. This is the same thing we've seen from Labor oppositions before. The Australian people, he's asking the Australian people to be fooled twice.
But what we want to see is we want to see both sides of politics admit when they're wrong and the opposition gets it right, or the government gets it right in this case. Now, the government's got a policy that's working. Look, there's lots of parts of it that I really hate personally. You know, I don't particularly like Manus Island or Nauru or a range of those things.
Me either.
But we have to do something, and this has worked. I think Bill Shorten coming out and saying it's worked. I support the government, and we're going to change our policy to be the same as the government's policy because it's worked, is exactly what Australians want to see in their politicians.
That's right, and they're sick of this sort of political blame game that goes on. And look, it took a bit of guts to do what he did, and as you can see, and I respect Lisa, I like her enormously, but he's actually had to take on his sections of his own party who are passionate about this to try and win it, and he should be given some credit for it. And I'd say the same thing if the Prime Minister was taking this view.
Well, he's not there yet. He's got to get this
No, he's got to win it.
conference.
Exactly right.
And will he? Peter, what do you think?
Look, I think he will. I mean, and again, let me say, I respect those people in the left who have a clear conscience about this, who will argue this passionately tomorrow, but he will win, in my view. In fact, the bottom line is if he doesn't win, then his leadership's over. That's the truth of it. But I do think he will win, and I think this will be a significant
This
outcome.
is the first conference in a long time, some decades, where the right hasn't controlled the numbers. You know, there are arguments as to how much control the left has, but the right doesn't control this conference. Lisa Singh, what do you think about where this particular argument will go? Do you think Bill Shorten will prevail, or will the left prevail?
Well, Bill Shorten may prevail. I mean, it is pretty tight, I think, in that sense, and I think there could be some bleeding either side of both factions. But I think if it does become Labor policy, I really hope it never has to be used, because I still hope that the diplomatic effort is put in place for a South East Asian and Pacific regional solution where we engage with our neighbours, we have good diplomatic relations to resolve this issue on a regional basis. We have some 59 million people in the world, the UNHCR, that are displaced.
That sounds fantastic.
That's why we've got to work together.
It's great to hope, but hope is not a strategy.
No, it's not about hope. It's actually about implementing a proper regional framework.
What it's about is
it's not about playing
on
politics,
a policy.
Paul.
No, it's not. It's
well,
about
that's
lives
what all
and
we've seen
saving
from the
lives,
coalition
and
for a very long time.
It's about 1,100 lives that were lost due to Labor's incompetent management of this issue in the last government. Now, one of the things that's being forgotten here is that we are dealing with ruthless criminal syndicates.
That's true.
They believed that we should be taken at our word, and we have delivered on what we said we were going to do. You are seeing the very same mixed messages from Labor here that you saw under the previous government, which meant that they lost control of the borders, they lost control of immigration, 50,000 people arrived, 800 boats, 1,100 people died at sea.
One of the arguments that Richard Marles has made today is that, you know, if Labor does this, they'll have a lot more transparency around it. There's not much, if any, at the moment around how it operates. Fair enough, while the operation is underway at sea, but why can't we, weeks, months after that, find out how these things are actually done so that we all have a better understanding of what we're talking about here?
Well, for one thing, these are dangerous operations involving the lives of Australian service personnel being at risk. So there are good
military operations in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Operational reasons for the confidentiality that is maintained around our practices.
What are they? That's what I'm trying to get to.
And we do not want to be signalling to these ruthless criminal syndicates what is the way that they should change their practices to achieve success. This is a constant, ongoing fight to protect our borders. We've put a lot of resources into it, and we've maintained a clear and consistent policy. A huge amount of damage was done because Labor came to government in 2007 saying that that they could manage our borders, completely lost control of it, and we've had a lot of work to get it back under control.
Lisa Singh, if in an ideal world, how would you like to see a boat dealt with that arrives in the waters of Christmas Island? If you had a regional centre, where would it be, and what would you do with the boat?
Well, I think that is where, we need, again, to have a very compassionate approach about how we deal with human beings and their lives when they're at stake. I mean, you're talking about people that have fled persecution in the main, that are seeking asylum, which they have the right to do in our country. So, turning them back isn't going to, stabilise our relationship with that potential country, be it Indonesia or the nearby.
Island, they're in Australia, so they're here, so you've got to deal with them
well, at the moment,
Australian
and it has been the policy for some time, at the moment they are obviously taken to one of our offshore processing centres, although they're not any processing's going on there, I understand, under this government.
Do you still support offshore processing?
Yes, that has been part of Labor's policy. It's a policy that I have supported for some time. Having said that, I don't support languishing in detention facilities offshore, which is what we've seen with Manus Island, because no one has been processed. I mean, when Labor opened Manus Island, it was called a processing facility, not a detention facility. But that is where our new platform deals with some of these issues. It looks at timeframes on detention. It does have a more compassionate approach. It looks at transparent oversight of detention facilities as well,
the time
that
of
under
detention is an
Australia's
interesting one,
control.
because we heard this week, I forget the exact number, but there's getting close to 100 now in Manus Island who have been processed and found to be refugees. None have been resettled yet, and we're talking about a significant period of time now. Labor set it up under Kevin Rudd, and it's been maintained by the current government, but it doesn't sound like anyone's been able to crack this deal with PNG on what to do with them when they're found to be refugees and need to be resettled. I mean,
but the government, this Australian government, hasn't been progressing that arrangement either. In fact, I almost think that they have used the people on Manus Island, the asylum seekers on Manus Island, as pawns to send their deterrence message. I mean, that is no way to treat people that have sought asylum in our country. You've got people in prison that have actual sentences and know when their sentences end, unlike people on Manus Island who don't.
The clear commitment is that people in immigration detention will be housed, provided health care, treated with decency. They are in immigration detention, but they need to be treated properly and with decency.
And do you know that that's going on Manus Island? Because I've sat on an inquiry into the death of Reza Barati, and I can tell you it's not.
And we have a strong commitment to treat them with decency. Peter Dutton has been repeating that point today.
Commitment's one thing, Paul. We're talking about what's going on.
It is very important that people are treated with decency, but it's also very important that we have a system which is not encouraging people to get onto dangerous boats.
Kate Carnell, you touched on this before, your concerns about what is actually going on at Manus Island and Nauru. And again, transparency's not there.
Look, I think any decent human being wants to make sure that these people are treated appropriately, that their kids are educated, that they have access to decent health approaches. I actually agree with Peter. I'd like to see us start looking at how we take more refugees into Australia. We've got a new Northern Australian approach. It's a great opportunity to look at how we may open up Northern Australia agriculturally and so on to refugees, not just the refugees from our region either. As you said, there's literally there's tens of millions, even more than that, of displaced people around the world at the moment. At some point, Australia's going to have to take more of these, but they have
including
to be,
people who have tried to come here by boat, been sent to Manus
who
or
have
wherever.
been found to be genuine refugees. That's the point.
100 you referred to.
Yeah, but ultimately, isn't the argument that will be an incentive for people to make the journey?
Look, we're talking about, we've got to turn back the boat policy. We've got a really tough policy. The reason I believe that should stay in place is because it's worked. The fact is, though, that people who are found to be refugees, I think Australia is going to have to take and should take a bigger percentage. We already take quite a lot of refugees into Australia.
I think the issue for present purposes is Mr Shorten says he's changed his policy.
I'm just asking about your position on the refugees. Those who are found to be refugees at Manus Island, what happens to them? The people who are sent to Manus and by Australia and found to be refugees eventually, what should happen to them?
Well, I mean, we have a set of international legal obligations, clearly. And so where people have achieved refugee status, where they've been found to have refugee status, and bear in mind that some are found to have it and some are found not to have refugee status, then we have a set of obligations,
including resettlement
under the UN Refugee Convention, to resettle them in a country where they can be secure
but just to
from
Kate Connell's
persecution.
point, to resettle them here in Australia ultimately?
Well, the obligation is to resettle them in a country where they are safe. And that is the obligation
but I'm asking
that we
you
have.
whether Australia should be one of those countries.
Well, let's bear in mind, we are a compassionate country and we bring in some 13,000 or so people each year.
So, but these people in Manus who are processed found to be refugees, should we take any in Australia?
Well, if they're found to be refugees, then they are certainly entitled. We have a obligation to facilitate them being somewhere where they are safe. Whether it's Australia, whether it's Cambodia, for example, if it's somewhere that they're safe, then and safe from the persecution or the fear of persecution, the well-founded fear of persecution that caused them to leave their original home, then we obviously need to facilitate that.
So yes, in Australia. Yes, some in Australia.
In a place where they are safe.
Including Australia?
Well, including Australia, but whether it's Australia or anywhere else. Let's focus on what the obligation is. It's to get them to a country where they are safe from the persecution.
Okay, but that's not the government's policy at the moment.
Well, my point is, for example, that we have a set of arrangements with Cambodia where people are able to
But
move there.
you're now advocating we should take some in Australia. Where the government's...
No, sorry, what I'm saying is
Well, you just said that. The government's policy is they will never come to Australia.
What I'm saying is that we have a set of international legal obligations and we will discharge them through arrangements in relation to, for example,
we can rewind the
Cambodia.
tape, but you've just said that should include Australia, that we take some of these people found to be refugees.
Well, no, I'm sorry, you've misunderstood me. In relation to the 13,000 people that we take each year under the humanitarian visa, then that's a program we have to take people from, for example...
No. We were just discussing those sent to Manus, found to be refugees. Should we take any in Australia? You said yes. I said no, that's not the government's policy. And your answer is?
My answer is I support the government's policy, and that is that we should maintain our international legal obligations where people are refugees, but that does not mean they have to come to Australia, and that's why we have, for example, arrangements with Cambodia.
We did need to take a break.
Can I just make a point about this, just quickly? Look, if we've got 100 people who are found to be genuine refugees, for God's sake, we should take them. I mean, what are we basically saying? We should farm them out to every, third world country around that we have a partnership with, like Cambodia and Papua New Guinea. Look, I support the government's position in relation to towbacks, right? Turnbacks. I do. I think it's sensible and it's pragmatic, but we can't lose our heart in this. And the other point, but just quickly, if I could, we've also got to have more transparency about this. I totally agree with Paul that you can't have it while the operation's on, but this is a democracy. At the end, if you think you can trust the bureaucrats to actually deliver this without breaching some of the government's positions, without some transparency, then you're wrong. There has to be some transparency down the road as well.
We did take a break. The other pre-conference announcement from Bill Shorten has been a big increase in the renewable energy target to 50% by 2030. Stay with us.
What's my little win?
Knowing I can get real fish from the freezer.
The people that make it actually catch it.
I wonder if they would cook it better than me.
You don't cook.
None of that mushed up stuff. Just beautiful.
Sealord fish fillets. Make any meal a win.
My little win? Getting this mug on TV. Do you come here often?
Check it out.
The Shopkins So Cool metallic fridge with 8 metallic Shopkins.
Wow, it's a world first exclusive and it's only $24. Save $6.
Yeah, let's get it.
Your kids will love the greatest toy sale on earth. On now at Target.
Hey, Budget Direct. Money Magazine Insurer of the Year, congratulations. Awesomest insurer in all of Australia. But can you do this?
Check it and rip it.
Oh, plane, coming in hot.
At Budget Direct, we don't insure Captain Risky to keep prices low. Quote now and get great discounts on car and home insurance online. Budget Direct, Money Magazine Insurer of the Year. Quote now.
Big night? No, big day.
Got to change the tiles, wrangle the magnolias, wrangle violet, finish your design, and poker night.
days start with Barocca.
Introducing Judge Dredd, the Mega Collection. Exclusive hardback graphic novels featuring the most groundbreaking stories and iconic characters. Build Judge Dredd, the Mega Collection. Issue 1 America, out now.
Mr. McEnroe to serve. Quiet, please.
Why do banks make it so hard to find the best home loan deal?
It could be easier than you think.
Yeah, if you understand rates and variables. I'm an athlete, not a numbers man.
That's why we have someone who does it all for you.
Some magical home loan fairy that does all the work.
We prefer to call them home loan specialists.
Looking to move, refinance or renovate? With a Bankwest Home Loan Specialist, switching to our super low rate is seriously easy.
Where would you rather be? All you need is a boat. Come to the Sydney International Boat Show, July 30 to August 3. Book online at sydneyboatshow.com.au.
Coles Fresh this, Coles Fresh that. A little better this and a little fresher that. Every day tastes a little better fresher with Coles Fresh.
I mean, you've got to be proud of those, don't you? That's Coles Fresh.
Coles Fresh this.
Every day, our team asks themselves the very same question. Is it Coles Fresh enough? I'd buy that.
Every day tastes a little better fresher with Coles Fresh.
That's Coles Fresh. Look at all this.
Everyone
Customers will love those. It's a lip smacker. Do I get a yum for that?
Yeah. What do you do?
What did you do?
I just Coles Freshed it.
She just Coles Fresh this, Coles Fresh
Oh, lovely.
a little better this and a little fresher that. Every day tastes a little better fresher with Coles Fresh.
Now that's Coles Fresh.
Out here, fed by rain, nurtured by earth, kissed by the Australian sun. This is where we grow.
On paper, retirement may look good, but you can be at the mercy of financial forces you can't control. A Challenger indexed annuity gives you a guaranteed monthly income, safe from changing markets and inflation. Search Challenger Annuities.
I want to turn to renewable energy, and Kate Carmel, to you first on this one. A 50% target by 2030. That would be a doubling in the space of 10 years of the amount of wind, solar and other renewable energy. We'll get to the price impact of that, but can it actually be done is the key?
With a huge amount of trouble is the story. It would be incredibly difficult. And the problem with actually reaching that sort of target, and it's hard not to talk about the cost of it, it's just going to cost a lot. There's no doubt. And you wouldn't need a target if renewable energy could be put in place in a competitive way. So if the energy was competitive from a price perspective, you wouldn't need a target. It would just happen. The fact is that to make that amount happen, it's going to require a significant amount of money, and it will push the price up.
To what extent is hard to know.
It's hard to know, yeah.
And there's various bits of modelling on the current renewable energy target, and some of it conflicting, and even the government's own Warburton review. There's
bits and pieces
about what it does to prices, but that's a 20% target or thereabouts. A 50% target is a different thing altogether. Peter Beattie, what do you reckon? Is this too much? Is this over the top from Bill Shorten?
I think really the way to achieve this is baseload is 70%. And I come from a coal producing state. And when I was in government, we opened coal mines, I freely admit it. Baseload power is about 70%. It's the gap in between, and as it grows, that's the renewable, it's how fast you do it. The Germans have got 30% by 2030, and they've got 60% by 2050. So the Bill Shorten target is higher than that.
And they don't have really cheap coal.
No, they don't. In fact, electricity prices in Germany are higher than the rest of Europe and higher than the United States. But they're taking the long-term view. They're going to make the technological breakthrough. What Angela Merkel and her government are basically doing is betting on the the technological revolution so they can sell the technology to the world. The real issue for us is what will happen with technology, David, and China's spending a lot of money on this, and so is the US. It's a case of what happens with technology in that period. The other question we've got to bear in mind, a lot of the coal-fired power stations in my state and elsewhere in 10 years are basically stuffed, so they either have to redo them or renew them, and there's a lot of money involved.
And they'll have to start making those investment decisions.
They will.
But they won't make those investments with those sort of policies on the table. With a 50% target, who'll invest in existing energy?
I put this to Mark Butler during the week. What are they to do in the coming years? Because you've got a major party, Labor, now saying 50% target. You know, they've got to make commercial decisions in an uncertain political environment and all of that. What do they do, Kate Carnell?
Well, I have to say what will happen is what's happened over the last couple of years. Everyone's putting off investment.
Put a bit of sticky tape on the
That's exactly what's happening, and that's an absolute tragedy because Australian industry has grown off the back of having a pretty expensive labour market but cheap power. That's been our point of difference. If we don't have inexpensive power, then the cost of Australian manufacturers, the cost of Australian business goes up.
So, Peter Beattie, do you think 50% by 2030 is too much?
Look, I think the answer is we don't know, in my view, and I think the party has to go out and explain this a lot better. I think we're a bit thin on detail. The real answer depends on how much technology, and we shouldn't forget the fact that China is spending a small fortune on renewables. Often you hear Australians say, oh, look, they're opening so many new coal-fired power stations. That's all true, but they're also spending a fortune on renewables. So with the Germans doing it and the Chinese doing it, technology could actually do this.
But what happens if it doesn't?
But hang on, sorry, let me just finish this. I'm just saying what could happen. I'm not getting into the politics of this. I'm retired from it, other than to be factual. The facts are that this could actually happen technically, but Kate's right. There are problems with it, and I think the challenge, at least that the Labor Party's got, is to actually explain how this is going to be done. That's the real challenge.
Peter says he's not getting into the politics of it. The reason that 50% is on the agenda this week is purely politics. Let's just bear in mind that we've just gone through a process of negotiating the existing RET between 41,000 gigawatt hours, 29,000, we ended up at 33,000, I think. One of the key issues there was certainty for industry, investment certainty, and of course the fact that to get to 41,000 imposed a substantial burden, a lot of capacity that needed to come on, that needed to be paid for. By the way, you still need to leave the baseload power there because this renewable doesn't meet baseload needs. We're now talking about massively bigger numbers. One of the estimates I saw floating around today was, I think, $65 billion in incremental capital investment to meet this target. But you're still going to need to leave a lot of baseload there because you're talking about renewables. So none of that has been thought through.
No one will invest
Storage
in
is improving.
Lisa Singh, why is this a good idea?
Completely differ from Paul on this. This is visionary. This is Labor mapping out its future in government for not just us, but for our kids. You know,
can it be done?
This is something that the Australian people want. This is not just some political, I mean, you want to talk about political point scoring. I mean, that's what we have had in relation to the renewable energy target over the last 2 years. We've had so much uncertainty created by Tony Abbott because he's against renewable energy for some ideological
but on Labor's
reason.
Policy that's been announced now, how much thought has gone into whether this can be achieved? And yes, Australians like the sound of renewable, no doubt about that. But I think they also want to know whether this can be done, whether we can have half our energy from renewables or not.
Yeah, of course.
Well, at this point, no, we can't.
But we listen to, you know, the peaks in this industry. We listen to the Clean Energy Council, the Solar Council,
Was there
and the like.
consultation with industry?
Of course, always. We are constantly having consultation with industry. I mean, Mark Butler, as our shadow environment and climate change minister, is constantly in contact with those organisations.
Let's go back to the policy principle. Let's go back to the policy principle. Peter talked about policy. We've got a challenge as a nation that we want to reduce carbon emissions, as do all countries around the world. So one of the key economic policy principles is what's the least cost, least economically disruptive way to do this. Now,
and what's the answer to that
setting
question?
a RET target is an extremely
it's funny you raise that question
expensive.
because there was a productivity commission, very interesting productivity commission inquiry into all of this that Bill Shorten as Assistant Treasurer in the former government commissioned. Productivity Commission looked at exactly this question: what is the cheapest way to reduce emissions? And it was emissions trading that came out on top. Renewable energy targets are actually quite expensive way of reducing emissions.
And the direct action policy is another efficient and cost-effective way to reduce emissions.
Not one economist has said that.
Because it's using a market-based mechanism. So what you're doing is it's a reverse auction process. It's a perfectly standard procurement process where you're seeking the cheapest value abatement.
You're using $2.5 billion in taxpayers' money.
Labor's policy is no good. Let me make this point. We have expressly considered what we've expressly considered how to do is how to do this in a low-cost way. Labor has given zero consideration to cost. They don't even care about cost. What they care about
emissions trading. Greg Hunt used to believe in this. He used to believe in emissions trading.
What Labor cares about is a headline.
Okay, we got that. The OECD's looked at this as well, and Kate, my question was, they've all found emissions trading is the cheapest way of reducing emissions.
And look, what Business in Australia is saying, as soon as our major trading partners have got an emissions trading scheme, we should go there too. Yeah. I'd love to see the Australian government go to Paris and say, well, look, let's all come up to the line on this, China, the US, and let's have a global emissions trading scheme. We know it's the cheapest way to go.
A renewable energy target is a pretty expensive way to bring down emissions, isn't it?
Well, you need a combination. If you're talking about reducing emissions, you need a combination. You need to create the incentives for industry to want to ensure that they're going to invest in new solar plants and new wind and the like.
The market.
I mean, we know we've got coal, but we've got to have the incentives there, and I think emissions trading is an important part of that, as is a renewable energy target.
Wouldn't it be great if the Germans made all this investment, the Chinese made all this investment, and it turned out that solar, for example, was much cheaper per kilowatt hour than existing forms of generation? Then guess what? The market would adopt that technology.
But emissions trading will also operate on the basis of a market. One of the real issues here, David, is going to be whether renewables, whether batteries and so on can actually store this. And this is one of the breakthroughs that really we need. And this is where a lot of research is being done. And there has been some progress in this. If we solve that problem, then this whole game changes.
Look, you're absolutely right. There's plenty we can agree on here, and what we can agree on is there's some exciting technological developments. Absolutely, battery power. If we can reduce the cost of storage, that does change the game. A lot of people are talking about the Tesla gigafactory in the US, and whether cheaper battery storage for cars will have spin-offs into other forms of technology. One of the other arguments you hear is that we're going to over time see the grid changing, and people will become generators as well as consumers. It's interesting. It would move the electricity.
Solar's doing a bit of that on roofs.
Well, exactly. It would move the electricity grid to being more like the internet, where it's going in both ways. Now, engineers tell you need to change the design of the grid, but it would change.
You know, the tragedy of this, though, is that business, the Clean Energy Council, a whole range of us have been working with both sides of Parliament over the last 12 months to come up with an agreed position. Everybody moved. I mean, we came from 20% real or below. Others came from 41 or above. It was an agonising process to get everyone.
Before the election, we had a bipartisan agreement.
Just for a moment, though, this is like in the last couple of weeks. But we all moved. The Clean Energy Council moved. We moved. Business moved. Everyone moved. Got an agreement. 2 weeks later, blown out of the water. It's just, that's the tragedy here.
It's a fair point, though, isn't it? I mean, the industry needs certainty, right? Take the politics out of it. A board at a power company have got to make these decisions. Big decisions, affects all their shareholders. They need the certainty. They need some bipartisanship, at least on this aspect of climate policy.
But David, if you're talking about renewable energy projects, I mean, I have some understanding of wind, because in Tasmania we have fairly large wind farms. The companies need to make decisions about their investment, 10, 15, 20 years out.
Yep, exactly.
So of course we were going to start, looking at what's going to be our target beyond 2020. 2020 is only 5 years away.
2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, we finally reached agreement, and everyone was out there, as was business and Clean Energy Councils and everybody, saying, what a relief, we've got a bipartisan agreement, so there is now confidence for business to invest.
But that only took us to 2020, Kate.
Sorry.
That's the current agreement. But, you know, we're talking about what's beyond 2020.
We believed through all of the discussions we had that coming up with a bipartisan agreement for that particular target gave us a way forward. What was the point of any of us moving if it was going to be blown away in a couple of weeks?
Just on this issue of the cost, Labor hasn't done its own modelling on this and really hasn't been able to explain what this is going to cost business and consumers to go to 50%. I guess others will be out there in the market doing that modelling now, and they're going to put all that out there between now and the election. Shouldn't Labor have tried to get on top of this from the outset and said, this is our modelling, this is what it's going to cost?
Well, look, we don't want to be left behind, David. You know, the rest of the world is moving on this. We know that it is important that we continue to invest in renewable energy beyond 2020, and we need to have ambitious targets.
And all of that sounds great.
Well, that's what we're debating at National Conference this weekend.
The cost is no small thing for our economy.
Well,
it's a pretty important
we also know that with, for example, our current renewable energy target, we had the government's own Warburton review show that over time costs come down.
Yeah, wholesale costs.
So it said wholesale costs, not
wholesale
retail costs.
Yeah, they
but it
come
did say
down.
net costs.
And I also think if
you do come down.
I also think if you were to ask the Australian people who more and more want to buy clean energy, they more and more want to have solar panels on their roof. Some 1.5 million Australians now have solar panels on their roof, and I'm sure in time we'll be investing in battery technology as well.
That's why we've preserved the small-scale renewable energy scheme numbers.
They want their government to have an investment in clean energy for the future.
But that's what we're doing for their power.
Well,
they don't.
Maybe they're willing to pay some more, but you know, there's a point at which renewable energy is fantastic, but at what price? Peter Beattie, it is about saving the planet and bringing down emissions, yes, but the cost question, does Labor need to get into this space with a better answer?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I'm a strong supporter of this because I think it gives a whole lot of new energy. I'm someone who thinks you've got to get the timing right. As I said before about how you bring in renewables in relation to baseload power. But look, frankly, they've got to do a better job in selling this than they have. I mean, look, I like Mark Butler, but he didn't explain himself terribly well on Sky News. We've got to get our modelling out there. Otherwise, what will happen is that this argument will be lost, and we will have, as Paul indicated before, a rerun of election debates in the past. Now, you know, if this policy is as good as I think it is, and as Lisa thinks it is, even though I have some reservations about parts of it, I think we should have basically said, let's go with what the Germans are doing, because if it was good enough for the Germans, then frankly, that's a target we could live with. Now, that's less than what's been announced, but that's just my view. But the modelling is important. Industry wants to know what the modelling is.
You'd be doing your own modelling.
Of course they will.
Of course, we'll be doing our own modelling.
And your modelling will dominate the debate if the Labor Party doesn't do it. That's the point. And it's totally understandable you'll do it.
And business relies, again, on affordable power in Australia. I mean, we simply can't grow and employ and be competitive without it, simply because, you know, our labour costs are so high. This is our point of difference. We can't lose it.
They've got to do a better job of selling it because it's not going terribly well so far, I've got to be frank.
I want to take a break, and then is it possible to sell an increase in the GST? Stay with us.
What are they doing, Grandpa?
They're in retirement. And people did it when I was a boy.
Talk to MLC or one of our advisors about how we can work together to save your retirement.
Beautiful things happen when you embrace different. That's why Hungry Jack's has combined the opposing flavours of cool fresh lime with spicy red chilli on our grilled chicken and tender crisp. Hungry Jack's new lime chilli chicken. It's a beautiful combination. The burgers are better at Hungry Jack's.
This month only, get fleet pricing for all at Holden. Like the Colorado LS 4x4 Crew Cab, now with a fleet price of just $36,865 drive away. Save like a fleet buyer without being one at your Holden dealer today. Let's go there.
What's it like to do my 12-week body transformation?
When I look back at my journey, I feel so empowered.
I went from 105 to 72 kilos in a little over 8 months.
Just love it. I love who I've become. I ran in my first marathon.
Strengthened what I think I'm capable of achieving.
Join me for the best 12 weeks of your life. Visit 12wbt.com and sign up now.
The Art of Knitting,
Every issue comes with a ball of gorgeous yarn and instructions. Learn all the stitches you need to make this beautiful throw. Create stylish knits for you and your home with the art of knitting. Issue 1 with knitting needles and 2 balls of yarn, just $2.99.
Australia's biggest stocktake sale has been extended, with 30% off the original price of men's suits and 50% off the original price of selected Van Heusen business shirts. Conditions and exclusions apply in Saturday, July 25. Visit Myer today.
It's the magic Friskies makes happen every day in so many ways. Friskies.
Discover the delicious new taste of Friskies. Purina. Collecting Earn and Learn stickers? Head into Woolies now and get 1 bonus sticker when you buy any participating Created with Jamie or Energizer product. Earn and Learn, only at Woolworths.
Romania. Timeless home of this thing, Dracula.
Hi!
Fast horses, fast horse cars, and a faster average internet speed than Australia.
Australia's internet sucks!
IONET's changing this by connecting Australia to the internet it deserves with the NBN. So, switch to a great value plan with the company that's #1 in customer service. It's a matter of national pride. Okay, that's enough.
At Hotels Combined, we're always hard at work searching for hotel deals. By comparing the top travel sites, we'll find just what you're after.
And it's free.
That's right, our service is free.
And
we also guarantee to get you the best price.
Best price guaranteed.
Finding a great hotel deal is easy with Hotels Combined.
Too easy.
Check out Hotels Combined
today.
As a coffee lover, you'd expect a barista to make your delicious cup of coffee just the way you like it. What you might not expect is having it handed to you in the comfort of your car. Make your car your cafe at McCafe Drive-Thru.
Out of all the land in New South Wales, 76% of it is used for agriculture. 7.6% is set aside and protected as national parks. 1.8% is used for homes and housing, while mining temporarily uses less than 0.1% and supports tens of thousands of jobs right across the state. For more facts, visit landusefacts.com.au. Authorised by S. Galilee, New South Wales Minerals Council, Sydney.
I want to talk tax. State and territory leaders have been meeting with the Prime Minister this week, looking at the big picture, what to do with our tax system, our federation system, to make it more efficient. Paul Fletcher, do you like Mike Baird's idea of a 15% GST?
Well, look, I certainly welcome the leadership that Mike Baird is showing. I welcome the fact that the Prime Minister is working together with leaders from around the country. I guess it made me think a little bit of the partnership between Bob Hawke and Nick Greiner 25 years ago, which was so important to changes to national competition policy. And what that depended upon was a process in which leaders of federally and at state level came together and worked together. So what the leaders have said is there's a process that's going on. There's a number of proposals that have been put up. I think the language was that proposals are on the table. Mike Baird's come forward with a proposal on GST.
And do you like it?
Look, I certainly welcome the fact that there is a process underway and that we're looking at these issues. Clearly, I think we do need to look at them carefully rather than making snap judgments. But I think it's a welcome thing that we have got leaders saying, let's have a look at a series of options.
But you can say whether you like it or not, can you? You can say whether you like it or not.
Do I personally like the idea of an increase in the GST? My own view is if you were to be doing something with the GST, it would need to be part of a bigger package. If you look at jurisdictions where there's been a change to the GST, typically it's been offset with personal income tax. So you saw that, for example, in New Zealand. But look, we're a long way from that. What the Prime Minister has said, what the leaders have said is there's a process, there are some things on the table, and let's let that process work through.
Kate Carnell, do you like it?
We've got to put up GST, there's no doubt about that. What we've got right at the moment is amongst the highest corporate tax rates in the world. We're relying, successive governments have been relying on bracket creep. That's normal everyday Australians paying more and more of their pay packet in tax, to fund government expenditure, which certainly isn't fair or reasonable. So that's what we're relying on at the moment. That's not reasonable and not sustainable. Our indirect taxes are amongst the lowest in the world. So to start getting a competitive tax system in Australia, we need to increase the GST. I don't think there's any doubt.
And you're right, that to pay for these increasing health costs in particular, you've only got a few options. You slash spending elsewhere, you increase income taxes, or you increase the GST. Lisa Singh, what's your preference out of those three options?
Certainly not increasing the GST. I mean, it's a regressive tax, it's a flat tax, it affects every single household in Australia. I much prefer to tax those that can most afford it rather than those that can least afford it.
So higher income taxes?
Well, whether it's higher income taxes, whether it's looking at multinational companies who are getting away scot-free with not paying their fair share of tax. I mean, that's Labor's policy. We want to see multinationals pay their fair share of tax. That's what when I'm talking about those that can most afford it, that is definitely them.
But your policy on that, remind me how much that's going to raise?
$8 billion.
Over 10 years?
Yep.
Something like that.
And the health costs we're talking about
it's
in 10
nothing
years'
at the
time
moment, David. It's nothing at the moment. It's nothing at the moment because the government's just letting multinationals get away with that.
That is a mere fraction of what's needed here. You can't say the multinational tax is going to pay for the health spending you want.
Well, you need a suite, obviously, of tax reform, and I just think
total Commonwealth expenditure
GST
is about $400 billion a year, a bit more. GST right now is about $35 billion in revenue, I think. So $800 million a year doesn't move the needle.
It wasn't well,
okay.
And
the problem is that nobody's got a mechanism that actually stops multinationals setting up anywhere in the world they want to.
But it just seems to me Labor's the party that wants to put this $80 billion of spending into health and education that it complains was cut.
It was cut. I mean, that was taken out by this government. That's why we're in this situation.
Spending on health and education is going up every year.
What happened to Gonski? I mean, we're in this position.
Senator, we've heard this argument from Labor that you want to put that back in, $80 billion.
That's right. Well, it should never have been taken out. We wouldn't be in this position about
where does that come from?
Talking up the GST.
Where does that come from?
Well, of course it needs to come from tax reform. Of course it does.
Tax increases.
But what I'm saying is it shouldn't come from a regressive tax policy, which is what the GST is.
So
it affects every single household.
Higher income taxes.
It may be all right for Paul to pay an increase, a 50% increase on the GST, but I'm sure a number of people in his electorates and electorates around the country would find that very difficult. I think some NatSem modelling today showed that it was around $3,000 extra per person a year. That's quite a lot for a lot of people.
Look to a world-class health system, and they expect the health system to be there when they need it, but it has to be paid for, and there's a huge gap.
Peter Beattie, you were there around the table putting together the GST originally, so we've got you to blame or to thank for what we've got. Well, is it working the way it should, and should it be increased?
Look, I was the last Premier to sign off on it, and the reason I was the last Premier to sign off on it was because Queensland didn't have the taxes that New South Wales and Victoria did. And I was one of the people who insisted that all state leaders had to agree before it could be changed, because I thought we would get screwed further down the line. So, look, I'm not a great supporter of huge increases in it, but can I tell you what the problem is? For someone who was there, this is sort of like deja vu. The GST, you remember Kate? Kate was there too as the Chief Minister, and she remembers what a pain I was. But I was an absolute pain. But you know, you were the classy one, I was the painful one. But the problem is, I think, well, hang on, we did this because it was going to be a tax it was a growth tax. As the economy grew, then the revenue was going to grow. This was going to solve all the problems. This was the panacea. See, David, the real problem is this. The Federation's broken. We can hide this, but the Federation is broken as a model. The overlap that exists between the Commonwealth and the state wastes billions of dollars every year. When are we actually going to have the guts to reform who's responsible for what at a state level and who's responsible for something at a federal level? I hear these politicians talk about, saving money. Well, for God's sake, why don't we do it?
Today, just taking one micro element of that, or perhaps not so micro, having Medicare cover hospitals.
Yes, well, that's a sensible idea. Kate will remember this. Yes. We've tried to get GPs into hospitals for years it will not happen because Commonwealth governments of both sides won't do it because it's cost shifting. But if you're sick and you've got your child has got a cold and you can't get to a GP, you go to accident and emergency. You've got the smartest doctors in the world, the specialist nurses, these intensive care people wasting money when they should be going to a GP. But let me make two other quick points and then I'll hand to Kate. The other thing we've got to look at is a national infrastructure strategy for this country, and we have a funding package to go with it. We're not building the infrastructure of the future. And the other thing we're not doing is looking at what innovation has to do. If you look at what the major economies of the world are doing, the United States, Germany, China, it doesn't matter. We're looking at innovation. We're looking at commercialising the research out of our universities, developing small businesses from it. We have to do that or we will be left behind.
Can I just respond on a couple of things there? We have a Federation white paper process underway right now precisely to address this issue.
I know that, Paul, but they should have agreed, they should have looked at the key issues today, was my point.
But what you're seeing from the federal government is let's have a thorough process to look at those issues of our federal structure, because you're right, those are the underpinnings then of the fiscal issues, and so that is very important. Now, in terms of infrastructure,
I guess just quickly, Paul, I guess that we had this discussion 15 years ago, which is why I'm a little bit cynical that another white paper. I respect the process, don't get me wrong, and I'm not trying to be critical of you, but for God's sake, we've got to make some decisions.
Sure, we do. But let's get the analysis
federal government need to lead the debate on this too.
Well, we are leading the debate. I mean, that's why we're putting out a Federation white paper process.
But no one seems willing to say we should increase the GST.
What we are doing is saying let's actually have a thorough process of looking at options.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is someone in the government needs to lead the debate, don't they?
We've had any amount of papers. We had Ken Henry. We've had, you know, look. There's not a new idea here.
No, there isn't either.
There isn't a new idea.
Kate's absolutely right.
I think the thing we've got to be careful of is it's not just about increasing taxes, because Peter's right. We've got such an incredibly inefficient system in place. The tax dollars we're paying right at the moment aren't being spent wisely.
Exactly.
At all.
Exactly.
Now, yes, we are going to need to change the tax mix, but it's not just about more tax. It's about spending our tax much more wisely, having a better mix.
Exactly.
And the Federation is broken. We were there. We know. We've run states and territories. We know that it's broken. And I tell you what, we could probably tell you where it's broken as well. And so could many other people.
We might have to reconvene, certainly you two.
Kate for Prime Minister, based on that speech,
Kate makes a good point about let's see if we can find some efficiencies and cost savings. And let me tell you one thing I'm against is an increase to the Medicare levy. That's just a straight out tax increase.
Well, it's an increase in income taxes.
It's a tax increase. We don't like tax increases on our side of the parliament.
We do have to wrap things up because we are right out of time. But a very interesting discussion, what has been a big week in the policy debate across a range of fields. Good luck with the Labor conference over the week. Good luck with the Federation and tax white paper process. We'll catch you all again soon. Thank you for your company as well. We will be back same time next week. See you then.